In this video, I want to read you some passages from the first chapter of my book called The Heresy of Heresies. And I may pause as I go through it and talk to you a little bit more about it as we go through, but here goes. This is chapter 1 is called The Common Sense Realism, A Place to Begin. Section 1, Reflecting on What Is. Let me just pause for a moment. I use this locution, what is, quite a bit throughout this book. It's common locution. By locution, I mean a statement or phrase or something like that. But it goes back to at least Plato in the Republic. But when I got attuned to it, I got it from a philosopher named James Schall. He's one of the people that this book is dedicated to. And I'll just show you here at the beginning of it. This book is dedicated to two people, James V. Schall and JP Moreland. Schall passed away in 2019. He's one of my teachers I never met. I got that line from him. He was at Georgetown for most of his career. He was a Jesuit priest, I think, by vocation, and a philosophy professor. I think he taught mostly political philosophy at Georgetown, and anything you can find by him on YouTube or any of his writings are, they're quite good and worth looking into. So, all right, Section 1, Reflecting on What Is. I arrive at the beach. I feel the cool, wet sand on my feet. I taste the saltiness of the ocean, the water on my lips. I hear the sound of the crashing surf. I smell the freshness of the sea air. I see waves breaking offshore. These things are real. And every person knows what is real from ordinary sense experiences like these, but these experiences, they also tell us more. They tell us about the nature of reality itself, about existence, about what is. The common experiences of my senses bring reality to me as a gift. The gift of reality brings joy, and reality is to be enjoyed for what it is. Yet, in addition to joy, there is also knowledge. I gain knowledge from my reflection upon reality given in common sense experiences. Let me read that sentence again. I gain knowledge from reflecting upon reality which is given in my common sense experiences. This whole book is built on this notion. Not only am I able to know reality, but I can also reflect upon what it is for reality to be what it is. Now, pause again. This is what the philosophical study of metaphysics is all about, or ontology. It's often called first philosophy, thinking about the nature of what's real, about what is. And that's what this book is all about. It's a defense of a certain metaphysical view, a specific kind of metaphysical view or ontological view about the nature of reality. I can reflect upon what it is for reality to be what it is. I can think about what it is for sand to be sand, waves to be waves, gulls to be gulls, salt to be salt, the ocean to be ocean. But I can reflect further and ask, what do the being of sand, waves, gulls, salt, and sea have in common with each other? What is this? All these things are real. I can see that. It's kind of obvious. You don't have to push very hard on this. And when you do metaphysics, you start to think, okay, I see these real things, but what is it that unites them in their common being? That's one of the questions of this book. What is it for these things to exist, and what is the nature of existence and reality itself that each of these things have in common? Well, this book tries to answer those questions. This book argues that common sense experience gives us direct knowledge of reality, of what is. Now, I mean that specifically, direct knowledge. Now, it might take a few steps of thinking, but it's still direct and immediate. That is, our minds can connect with what is. From our common sense experiences, we can know the nature of what it is for things to exist, and the nature of existence itself. This book argues that it is only by means of knowledge of what is that one can live well. This book defends common sense metaphysical realism within the Christian tradition. Now, there's going to be reasons for this, why I think the Christian tradition is the way to think about these things, but more of that later on. within the Christian tradition as the basis for being a good person and living a good life. One of the main motivations for me writing this book is to help my students. And I'm completing this book after, almost three decades after teaching my first philosophy courses. Having taught at the university level for a long time, I've come to realize that the ideas of common sense realism are in the minority today across the curriculum and across the academy, but especially among my students. One of the reasons that real objective values, whether ethical or aesthetic, are largely rejected by students is due to a deep confusion regarding the nature of reality. Okay, this is the problem of relativism, generally speaking, in our culture and in our world today. Alan Bloom, he was, I just have to tell this story. Back in the 1900s, when I was an undergrad, I had some professors who, won't name them, but when this book came out, they did not like it. It was a critique. Alan Bloom's book was a critique of higher education in the United States in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 60s, and on into the latter decades of the 20th century. And he really pushed this idea that relativism was dominant. And of course, if you're a professor and think there's something to relativism, you're not gonna like that critique. Well, that's one of the issues in that book that professors back in the 80s didn't like. But let me read on. Here's what Bloom recognized. He recognized this intellectual problem of confusion regarding reality amongst his students in the latter half of the last century. He claimed in The Closing of the American Mind that, quote, "There's one thing a professor can be absolutely certain of. Almost every student entering the university believes or says she or he believes that truth is relative," end quote. It's from Bloom's Closing the American Mind, page 25. The one thing a professor can count on is that almost all of their students are relativists about truth. More than a generation later, and 20 years plus in the classroom, I can testify that things have gotten much worse. Some days I feel like there's hope with a certain subset of students, but this is what happens when you let go of common sense, right? The most tragic thing in the deepening intellectual fog of relativism is that students are not just relativists about beauty, ethics, religion, or even truth, as Bloom recognized. Students today are relativists about reality. Here's an example of this that occurred recently in an intro to philosophy class that I was teaching. I was sketching for students the main areas of the disciplines of philosophy, talking about terminology and questions that are pursued in those areas. And when I got to the area of ontology or metaphysics, which asks questions like, what is the ultimate nature of reality? That's part of what this book is doing. When a student raised their hand and said, with a straight face, just said, is there just one reality? Or does each of us have our own? I do have my reality and you have your reality. Now, as a philosophical question goes, that's a really good one. I mean, this is a good philosophical question. This book, this book project, it attempts to answer that. One of the first things I do to answer my students' questions about reality is to help them see the problems of relativism in philosophy. I do this by showing that, first of all, relativism doesn't follow from epistemic or doxastic diversity. Second, I show it's self-refuting, and then thirdly, I show that it's unlivable. And all these strategies are done by Christian philosophers and non-Christian, or Christians or philosophers who have no religious, maybe they're atheists, I don't know. James Rachels is one. Other Christian philosophers who do the same kind of strategy are people like Greg Kokel or Francis Beckwith, and they've got a little book called The Relativism for Feet Firmly Planted in Midair. If you haven't read it, go out and get it. It's really, really good. It's maybe a little dated in some of the examples, but timeless in terms of its content. And James Rachel's critique of relativism is quite good. I think it's from his book called The Ethics, or on Ethics, or something like that. So after you refute relativism and show that it's untenable, that's just a beginning. It's just a beginning. You can't just stop there. We can't simply show our students that relativism is unreasonable. We have to hold forth light. We must show them what is. What is. My own strategy on this is to start with truth, and especially a defense, a robust metaphysical, realist correspondence view of truth. Now, if that doesn't mean much to you, it's okay. But I have a book on this topic of truth. It's called Theories of Truth and Introduction. And I go through in there and I try and defend the correspondence view of truth against other alternatives like pragmatism or coherentism or relativism. So I usually start with truth, and then from there I move on to metaphysics, and that's what this book is doing. This book you're reading or listening to that I'm walking you through now, this book will rest on my defense of truth as correspondence as a necessary component for an introduction to common sense realism about what is. Now, you might expect that the sort of absurdity that we're faced with today regarding students' belief in the irreality of reality if we were living under a totalitarian regime, right? So totalitarian regimes, they say whatever you need to just kind of get by. If it were a totalitarian system like George Orwell described when he wrote 1984, that in the end the party would announce that 2 and 2 made 5, and that the very existence of external reality was denied, and that the heresy of heresy was common sense, that might it could kind of make more sense of that people reject common sense because they're living under a totalitarian regime. But we're not living under a totalitarian regime, not yet anyway. Depends on how pessimistic you are about current events. However, I think we in the academy and the broader culture, and my students especially, live under a totalitarian spirit of the age, a zeitgeist, that is relativistic. And the outcome of their philosophy by the time they enter college, and usually worse when they leave, is the same as that of the party in Orwell's dystopia. The existence of external reality is rejected. The denial of the objectivity of reality has been accomplished in the mind of my students not by force of a political regime or a party, but by poorly reasoned philosophy over many years. And a lot of times this is done to them or to us rather than by us, although it might be a bit of both. My students figure out very quickly that if reality itself is not real, then necessarily aesthetics, ethics, politics, and religion aren't real either. So this book, The Heresy of Heresies, was written to ameliorate that condition, to get rid of it, to heal it, to make it less worse off. I mean, if that's one thing you can do in writing a book is make the world a little less worse off, maybe a little better is another way to put it, it's worth doing. It defends the objectivity of reality through the resources of common sense realism and is understood within the Christian intellectual tradition. This is the heresy of heresies. Common sense realism is antithetical and heretical to the ontological relativism of our age. The fog must be lifted. I feel like I'm sitting here, if you know C.S. Lewis's book, his space trilogy and That Hideous Strength. St. Anne's is above the fog. Sitting where I am today, I'm literally above the fog. Beautiful blue sky here in the background. The fog must be lifted. Light must shine on what is. In a post-truth and a post-real world. For thou wilt light my candle, the Lord my God will enlighten my darkness. Psalm 18:28. Thanks for watching.